So I haven't done PowerPoint since. Let me first say that I want to congratulate Marilyn and Camilla on everything that you do and everybody there in your state has done over the years to connect kids to nature. It's really a remarkable effort that you all have done. The film is terrific. There are, as it turns out, there are several films that have come out of Last Child. That's partly because I was very passive-aggressive at the beginning. People came to me and said, let's do a movie out of Last Child, a documentary. They offered money. I thought it sounded like an awful lot of work, and I didn't think it sounded like enough money to do it right. And the only good reason I thought to do a documentary was if it was going to be better than the book. And this documentary that she has done is just terrific. I usually hate watching myself in movies, on TV and all that, but I actually kind of like the way I did in this movie. So, although I should have used PowerPoint with my wife in it. This issue, as you know, has moved on. I mean, we began focused very tightly on children in nature and connecting them to nature. I think we've moved into a period in which we have to ask the question, do we need to put this in a larger context? Obviously, connecting the next generation and future generations to the natural world is our collective goal. But in order for that to be sustainable, do we need more? And I've come to the conclusion that we do. There are two reasons that I wrote the nature principle, which is what I'd like to focus on at the beginning of this. We can, particularly in the question and answer period, we can talk about the children's issue. But I wrote nature principle for two reasons. One was at almost every sermonette that I give around the country, an adult will stand up or come to me later, and as one woman in Seattle did, she literally picked me up by the lapels and said, listen to me, adults have nature deficit disorder too. And I told her to let go of me, and she did. But I wrote that down, and she said, you got to do a book about that. So I wrote that down and put it in my wallet and thought about it. Then as time goes by, some of you have heard me speak before, I think, and I usually end by talking about the fact that Martin Luther King said in many ways that any culture will fail, any movement will fail if it cannot paint a picture of a world that people will want to go to. The nature principle is an attempt within my great limitations to describe that world. So what I want to do is I want to begin by doing something I definitely don't usually do, which is read something to you. It's a very short piece that I was working on today that I'm probably going to put up on my blog, but it's become kind of the theme of this book tour. So if you'll have a little patience, I'll read it to you. It's just a few paragraphs. The theme of it is why we need what I call a new nature movement. It's time for a new nature movement and a new collective vision of the future. Martin Luther King Jr. taught us by word and example that any movement, any culture, will fail if it cannot paint a picture of a world that people will want to go to. As others have said, his speech was not called, I Have a Nightmare. Today, when we think of the future, why is it that the dominant images that leap to mind usually, for most of us, look a lot like Blade Runner, or Mad Max, or Cormac McCarthy's The Road, a post-apocalyptic dystopia filled with human brutality and stripped of nature? Popular culture, or for that matter, academic and journalistic culture, seem drawn to that flame. What does that mean to be drawn to that flame? If that's the future that we see ahead of us, is that the future we'll get? For decades, our culture, I believe, has struggled with two addictions. One is to oil, and the other is to despair. In the nature principle, I ask the reader to imagine a different future, a society in which our lives are as immersed in nature as they are in technology, every day where we live, work, learn, and play. To create that future, we need a new nature movement. The stakes are enormous, even as biodiversity and traditional connections to nature fade, and almost religious faith in technology suggests that, well, we don't need nature much anymore. We even hear talk of a transhuman or post-biological era in which human beings are optimally enhanced by technology. In the book I ask, aren't we getting a little ahead of ourselves? We have yet to even adequately investigate how the natural world enhances our intelligence and our health. Environmentalism is in trouble. This is not to say that environmentalism has failed. It's too easy to forget that rivers that once caught fire now produce healthy fisheries. But such successes did not prepare us for an even larger global challenges, including the human disconnection from the natural world. As of 2008, for the first time in human history, more than half of the world's population lives in towns and cities. This means that in the future, if human beings are to have a meaningful relationship with the natural world, that relationship will likely take place in urban areas. This change will produce one of two outcomes: either the end of meaningful daily experience in nature, or the beginning of a new kind of city, and a new view of our relationship with the natural world. Today, poll after poll show that environmental concern is at its lowest point in many areas since Earth Day 1970. It's almost as if the more we talk about climate change, the less people believe it. Why is this happening? Economic recession, a well-financed campaign of disinformation, an almost viral spread of prideful ignorance, political dysfunction, all of the above. But at root is disconnection from nature. We have, in short, as a species, fallen out of love with the natural world, and we have lost faith in the future. Still, in recent years, the Children in Nature movement has revealed a vein of hope, a latent faith that we can make change, that people can join together across party lines and religious economic divisions to assure that their children have the privilege, the right to meaningful experiences in the natural world. Now the question is, will adults do for themselves what they apparently will do for their children? In the long run, the Children in Nature movement will not succeed unless adults come to see the importance of their own connection to the natural world, our health and well-being, our intelligence and creativity, our ability to feel and be fully alive, all of which we now know can be greatly enhanced by frequent contact with the natural world. So I began to ask this question: what will environmentalism and sustainability, and several other movements, as currently defined, evolve into? Surely we need a bigger tent. In fact, a number of streams are already gathering force the force of many movements in one current. Science is nourishing the headwaters. An expanding body of evidence links the human experience in the natural world to better physical health and enhanced cognitive abilities. Other branches converge: biophilic design of new homes, workplaces, neighborhoods, cities, reconciliation ecology, and human nature social capital, as I call it in the book. Ecopsychology and other forms of nature therapy. A healthy by nature movement that prescribes green exercise in which park rangers and others become nature paraprofessionals, para-health professionals. The rediscovery of place-based learning, the growth of slow food, organic gardening, urban agriculture, vanguard ranching, and other forms of the new agrarianism, the walkable cities movement, and the children in nature movement. There are more branches, but the common denominator of all of them is the belief in human restoration through nature. The goal of going beyond achieving energy efficiency or even carbon neutrality to producing human energy through nature. Not just efficiency, not just saving energy, but producing human energy through nature. What if all of these currents and more come together into a great river? What if, rather than flowing toward dystopia, this river takes us into one of the most creative periods in human history? Then I believe the future will belong to the nature smart, those individuals, families, businesses, and political leaders who develop a deeper understanding of the transformative power of the natural world and who balance the virtual with the real. The more high-tech our lives become, the more nature we need. That's a future worth creating. But first, we have to imagine it. That's what the nature principle is primarily about. I mentioned this idea of a new nature movement in the book, but I don't go into too great a detail. One of the last chapters talks about the evolution of the environmental movement, some of which I thought through while sitting literally in Aldo Leopold's shack, where he wrote much of the Sand County Almanac. We have to move on. We are stuck. As I said in the essay, environmentalism is in a tough shape. It's healthy at the local level, pretty much, but at the national level, all of the leaders of the environmental movements, of the environmental organizations, understand this. They know that they're in trouble. So the Children of Nature movement, I think, it does give us hope, but will it be sustainable? Will it outlast the next few years? The Children of Nature Network, which Marilyn and I are involved with, and some of you are involved with, is helping that movement, but that it cannot be based only on one or several or many nonprofits. It has to move into a period of cultural change, self-replicating cultural change. And only if adults see what's in it for them will that cultural change really take place. If you notice, I didn't call it the new environmental movement. We have a linguistic problem. That word has so much baggage to it. I really do believe we need a bigger tent. And we need not to judge each other so harshly. Some people hate fishermen. Some people think that some environmentalists are snobs, using very expensive day packs. We need to put that aside. We need to put political and particularly religious barriers aside. One of the things that surprised me about Last Child in the Woods and the response to it was the acceptance or the encouragement of it by religious figures. I thought I was going to get a lot of grief, particularly from the religious right. There's a chapter near the end of the book about the spiritual necessity of nature for children. I was very, very careful with that chapter. I have a very conservative Christian friend. I asked her to read the chapter, and she's quoted in it, but I was still worried about it. I actually do want to bring people together on this issue, not drive them apart. I was still worried about that. One of the first champions of Last Child was the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, a guy with a radio show, a very big Christian radio show. I doubt that he and I would agree on very much politically, but we saw a common cause in this issue. I was even asked to be on the 700 Club on the Christian Broadcasting Network. That's Pat Robertson's show, for some of you who don't watch that. A good friend of mine who's high in the Sierra Club said, "Rich, don't go, it's a trap." But I went. I had a good feeling about it. And I went and I taped the interview in D.C. and then I walked out of the studio onto the street. I was feeling really puffed up, really good about myself. I thought I'd done a great job. And then I looked down and realized that my zipper had been open during the entire Christian Broadcasting Network interview. And so, you know those moments where you know your true place in the universe? That was one of those moments for me. But here's the deal. They did a great job. They did a great job on that piece. I was very gratified. They went out and did film. Pat Robertson commented on it, etc. And some of you may probably have heard me say this before. I puzzled over that and came to the conclusion that I think most intelligent religious people of whatever brand have an intuitive understanding that all of spiritual life begins with a sense of wonder. And what's one of the first windows into wonder? Maybe you're like me. You might remember crawling out through the grass to where the grass ends, the rocks and the weeds and the trees begin, and turning over a rock and finding out for the first time that you're not alone in the universe. And listening to wind and trees for the first time, and hearing voices there that are not your own or your parents. That feeling of wonder and awe, we're in danger of shutting the window to that, and I don't think any of us want to do that. I think religious people understand that. It's no accident, I don't think, that when studies have been done about how people talk about nature, atheists use religious language, use spiritual language when they talk about nature. This is intuitive, this is part of us. One aspect of this, and I don't remember if I talked about this in the film, but I think at some point we have to begin to ask this question, and I asked this in the Nature Principle. Do we have a right to a walk in the woods? Do our children have a right to a meaningful experience in nature? I started asking that question to some of my friends who are environmentalists. Most of my friends are environmentalists. I started asking them that question, and it made them very nervous, some of them. And I was curious about that. And over time I realized, yeah, they have a point. Here, great, one more thing to sue each other for. I understand that. But they continued to add, even after that, we acknowledged that issue. They still were uncomfortable with that. Over time, I came to think that some of my friends who are environmentalists, deep down, really don't want people in nature. And I understand that. I feel that too. I mean, when you think about it logically, why should we let a species have a right to what it is destroying? I understand that argument. Then on the right, and right, left, it doesn't mean a lot anymore, but let's just use it for the sake of discussion. Meanwhile, over on the right, the far religious right, not some of the people I was talking to, but the extreme religious right, there is a sense that nature doesn't matter. It's only there for our dominion. It's only there to exploit, to use. At best, it's a stepping stone on the way to the true paradise. It's very interesting to me how those two views, how similar they are in a way. Both of them think of nature as the other, as separate from human beings. I don't think we're going to do much about our role in the natural world until we do something about that assumption. I remember interviewing a little girl that I quoted actually both in Last Child and in the Nature Principle at the grade school that I went to when I was a kid. I walked into the grade school, the same linoleum was there, the same exact teachers were there, the same hairdo. They took me into a room where they brought a lot of the kids from several classrooms into this one class. And I was standing there in front of them, and I found myself looking out the window of this classroom in which I had sat a long time ago, watching a row of trees in the spring move back and forth. And vaguely I could hear a voice from long ago saying, "Richie, would you please turn around and pay attention?" So I did. I was one of those kids that would have been put on Ritalin. I know I would have been put on Ritalin. The woods were my Ritalin. One of the teachers had said she wanted me to listen very closely to one particular little girl. They called her their little poet. She was about 10 years old, I think. And in fact, she stood up when we were talking about experiences in nature. And she said that, she said, "When I am in the woods, I feel that I am in my mother's shoes. When I am in the woods, I feel that I am in my mother's shoes." And then she talked about her special place. She said, "I had a special place, big tree. Under that tree was a little hollowed out place, and I kept my blanket down there. And I would go down to my special place in the woods and lie down on my blanket and look up at the branches and the leaves in the wind and think of my poetry." And she said, "One day I went down there and my tree was gone. And my blanket was gone. And my special place was gone. And then she said, when they cut down my tree, they cut down part of me." Now, I don't think that little poet was speaking metaphorically. I think she was speaking literally. If E.O. Wilson is right with his biophilia hypothesis, if the research that's coming forth on the natural world's profound impact on our health, our physical, our mental health, our ability to learn, if all of that is true, then this is part of our humanity. This is truly, literally part of us. I think that we have a human right to anything which is, in a positive way, part of our humanity. We talk about people's right to computers. We talk about kids' right to cross the digital divide, to be part of the internet. If we can talk about the right to that, then we can talk about the right to a meaningful connection with the natural world. Part of what is interesting, I think, about this question is it possible to be truly responsible for something if you don't have a right to have an association with it, to have a relationship with it? I don't think it is. If we're going to have a positive relationship with nature in the future as a species, then we need to have a right to a walk in the woods so we can take care of it, and it can take care of us. So I'll stop there and we can have our discussion. Thanks.
So what I would like to do is to have those of you who have a question, if you want to come step to this side of this room, and then you can sit in the chair and be the one who addresses Rich directly. So somebody, where's the ticker?
This chair?
This chair right here, and then you'll see yourself on the screen right up there.
Richard, I'm Dwight Haynes, a Methodist pastor, and I just want to say that I read Last Child in the Woods. I was so inspired, I created a sermon, and I have to tell you, I've done it in more than one place, and I've gotten a positive response from several people. Thank you.
Oh, great.
Nature and spirituality, great connection. In your book, you did mention, and I was wondering this afternoon while I was out cycling, how did he respond when your young son said, "Daddy, are God and nature married, or are they just good friends?" I thought that was a profound question. But
I think I think it's exactly what are God and Mother Nature married, or are they just good friends? Well, I first laughed. I thought it was hilarious, you know? And then I thought about it more, and I think I tell this story in Last Child. I took him to Matthew was about 5, I think, then. And I took him with me to meet Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, who I was going to interview. This is a long time ago. And we were sitting there, and they were comparing notes on Fred Rogers has in his studio, he has at home, he had one of those machines that smooths rocks. You know, I can't remember what they're called. Well, Matthew happened to have one too. So they were comparing notes on that. And then I said, you know, Mr. Rogers, Matthew had a question the other day. I wonder if he'd share it with you. And so Matthew asked him the question, are God and Mother Nature married or just good friends? And unlike me, Mr. Rogers, who is of much higher consciousness, did not laugh. And he was, by the way, I think a Presbyterian minister.
Right.
And he and Matthew kind of went off by themselves and had this discussion. And I could only pick up little pieces of it. Not that I was eavesdropping or anything. And I didn't really hear the full answer. But Matthew seemed to be satisfied. And as we left, Mr. Rogers said to Matthew, will you please stay in touch with me? And think about that question as you get older. When Matthew was in high school, Matthew wrote a letter to Mr. Rogers. And it was a long letter, and still I don't know what was in it, but it was all about this theme of God and Mother Nature being married. And he got back a letter from Mr. Rogers. I don't know what was in any of those letters, so I'm out of the hole in terms of my consciousness. But I thought that, you know, obviously that was wonderful of Fred Rogers. I mean, I've only, I think, met two people that I thought were truly beatific, and one was Fred Rogers, and the other one was Thomas Berry. So, later on, by the way, in the Nature Principle, in one of the early chapters, the first chapter actually, which is called Singing for Bears, which is about the full use of the senses and nature's impact on that, Matthew asks, and this as a young 20-something guy, he asked me, Dad, is faith a sense? Because I was talking to him about scientists no longer talk about 5 or 6 senses. They now talk about as many as 30 human senses, most of which we don't use. And I make the argument that we don't use them because we're focused in on computers and we're not in the natural world very much, and that's when all of these senses, many of them, really come out. But he asked, what a great question is faith, is belief in a higher power, is that a sense that some people have that can maybe be brought out in nature? I think that loops back to that thing that, even atheists talk about nature in spiritual language.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, do you have a question? Yep.
Hi, Mr. Louv.
Hi.
I'm Sue Moore. Actually, this is about the 4th time I've seen you. The other 3 times were in person, so I'm just really delighted.
Yeah, you look familiar. Right?
Well, I brought my Envarth on Teams to hear you, and yeah, I've been around. But this is wonderful because it's another book and another approach about talking about adults as well, when you just talked about the nature principle. And I think that's really an important aspect of this whole thing, is that the adults are very often suffering from nature deficit disorder, and I think as a result of that, their kids are too. And I know in our church I started this Earth Stewardship group, and I try to apply the principles that we did with Audubon Society, the 3 A's of awareness and appreciation and then advocacy through the different levels, and I think you discussed that in your Last Child in the Woods book. But I think in terms of the religious movement, and you mentioned the religion, and that when E.O. Wilson wrote his Creation, he was trying to link nature and creation. And I think religions, we just Methodist minister just spoke, and I was Methodist, and I'm UCC now, but that doesn't matter. But the point is, I think a lot of religions are now approaching this nature and creation in a whole new perspective. And you mentioned the dominion over, and I think some religions do say dominion over, but I think there's certain aspects of the religion, and I think unfortunately it's the political right in those religions, because a lot of the religions are really looking at as dominion as not power over, but taking care of nature. And I think a lot of congregations and ministers are realizing that and trying to accentuate that. And I know I belong to an organization called the New England Regional Environmental Ministries, and there are 6 states involved, the New England states, and we're looking to expand it to an ecumenical movement, and I don't think it's going to stay in New England. I think it's going to spread throughout the United States, and I like to think that all of these different perspectives, whether it be religious or scientific, I mean, I'm work with Audubon as scientist, but I look at it from a religious perspective, and political, that, I think that maybe there's a movement coming that's spreading, and it might not be, and I know what you mean by using the word environmental. I call mine earth stewardship, just for that reason, that we care for the earth, God's creation, if that is the link that will get people interested in it. But for example, the Interfaith Power and Light, that's a movement. I'm sure you've probably heard of it. It started in California, and then it's, Pennsylvania and Massachusetts and New England. But that's an ecumenical movement as well, and it's preserving creation and taking care of the earth. And I think that it would be a positive way to look at it if we can think of all these links. You were talking about the Nature for Adults, and the religious movements talking about preserving creations, and just the 350.org, that being linked in, and looking at creation, as well as there was another, just recently they had this 40-day Lenten carbon fast, and it started just in this little, 6 New England states, and this carbon fast, it was an ecumenical thing, it went worldwide, 14 countries, 6,000 people linked onto this, and it wasn't just a religious thing, it went outside religion to people just practicing for 40 days, some aspect of preserving that creation. So, I like to accentuate what you were saying about the links between these religion and science and that.
And these words are all tricky. I understand the conflict between stewardship and dominion and the way what people read into those words. I know I quote one guy in the Last Child. I think his last name is Gorman, and he's a leader in the evangelical and environmental movement. And he says, let's move beyond the whole discussion of stewardship versus dominion. I mean, look around, look what we're doing to the earth. We have dominion. Look at the evidence of what we're doing.
Right.
And he wants to move beyond those words, and I think that's a good idea. There are other words, I think, that are problematic too. Obviously, environmental is one. I mean, for one thing, environment, that is such a bloodless word in many ways. I mean, what does it mean, the environment? This room is an environment. Nature seems to be a word that doesn't offend people. They resonate to it. Environmentalism has so much baggage now. And again, I will defend environmentalism as it has been practiced, more than many people will, because I remember a time when my parents thought nothing of throwing bags of trash and beer cans out the window of the car going down those Missouri highways. I remember those streams in Missouri and Kansas where people would dump cars over the edges of the streams. You saw it all the time. That's where the dumps were. That's gone. Look at the rivers now. The Potomac River is a great fishery. You could practically walk across the surface just 20, 30 years ago. So there's been huge improvement, but it's not keeping up. Those polls are very troubling about how human beings are, or at least Americans are viewing the environment. So that word is a problem. sustainability as a word is a problem, or at least problematic. I don't have a better word, so I still use it. But even the people who use it a lot understand that it means too many things to too many people. I had a guy that I was interviewing to be my agent years ago, my book agent, and he said something that always stuck with me. He said, Rich, a book that's for everyone is a book that's for no one. It's kind of like that with this word sustainability. Also, and this is even more important, I think, for me at least, that word sustainability suggests stasis, that we're only here to sustain. Any self-respecting creative 16-year-old is not interested in stasis, and neither is the creative 16-year-old in us. We want to create, and that brings me full circle to where you started, which is this discussion of creation. And E.O. Wilson's wonderful attempt to have this dialogue with religion. And he was raised, I think, a Methodist. He was raised
Southern Baptist. Yeah, he just came from starting to link that.
Here's another take on that word creation. One of the ideas in the nature principle is that conservation is no longer enough. Even if we conserve everything we have in terms of wilderness, and we must, it won't be enough for the biodiversity that we and other creatures need. So we're going to need to start creating nature. We're going to have to become creationists. And that can be done in cities. It can be done in our backyards with native species and bringing back butterfly migration routes, et cetera, et cetera. Our homes can be made into restorative homes through nature. And by doing that, we are creating nature. Green roofs can be planted that will be specifically to aid in the bringing back of certain species. Now, obviously, it's ironic that we would be creating nature, and is created nature truly nature? I believe it is. I believe it is. And by doing that, we can transform our cities, transform our lives, and finally begin to add to the biodiversity of the earth rather than take away only.
That's great. That's good.
So Rich, we have one, maybe two questions for you if you want to go through those quickly, and so we can get you on to where you need to go next too.
Okay, great.
I'd rather stay here.
Hi, my name is Therese. I had just a personal question for you. Do you feel in the future optimistic or pessimistic about nature surviving on our planet? I think it concerns me that some people don't believe in global warming. And I just, I think your ideas are wonderful, and I would love to see everything that you say come forth. But how do you feel really? Do you think it's going to work?
Did you ever hear George Carlin's monologue about the phrase, "we must save nature"? Look it up on YouTube. You'll find it. It's really funny and frighteningly true. Basically what he says is what a lot of biologists in fact say, which is nature will survive us just fine. It doesn't need us. It'll take a while. It'll change, but nature always changes. And Carlin actually believes nature wants to get rid of us. So.
Well, that's my concern, is that we'll get rid of nature before nature has a chance to get rid of us.
No, I think nature's going to be around a long time after we're gone. One way or another. One way or another, it'll be here. It'll be in different forms, etc. I think that is I think we have to reframe that. We must save our relationship with nature. We must do that for our own restoration as a species. And in the short run, we can do a lot of damage. In the long run, nature will survive and it will be rid of us. But in the meantime, we need to have a relationship with nature that that restores us as we restore what we have destroyed in nature, and as we create new nature. It's a different frame for thinking about the future. And within that frame, I'm very optimistic. The Children of Nature Network has surprised a lot. Children of Nature movement has surprised a lot of people. Certainly surprised me. I'm going to get a T-shirt that says "Who knew?" You know, and I'm sorry I'll give away the last line of the book, but I've said it before. Some of you heard me say it. The new book, which is there is no practical alternative to hope.
Good, good, thank you.
It's a choice.
And that seems like a perfect way to leave this. And given your schedule and our schedule, I'm going to say thank you very much, Rich, for being here, talking with us. It's been a pleasure having you back in New Hampshire again, even though you're in Minnesota. Okay. And really appreciate all of your insights and inputs to this. I look forward to seeing you again at the next Children in Nature gathering.
Okay, thanks. You sure I can't stick around? We could all get some dinner and some wine.
What do you think? Maybe after the movie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, look for me after the movie. I'll be in the back.
Okay, we'll do that. Thanks again. So, Jeff, I'll have you